Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cynthia Chavez Lamar, the director of the Indian Arts Research Center at SAR. Welcome to IARC's 5th annual speaker series, which is titled Art in Flux. This year's series is dedicated to discussing key issues and programs affecting artists and art institutions today. As in previous years, we have partnered with another institution in hosting our series. This year, we thank the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts for being a co-host and sponsor. In addition, I would like to thank Lara Evans at the Institute of American Indian Arts for helping to develop this year's program. Today's panel is called Artists, Natural Resources, and the Environment. For artists who draw on their environment or natural resources to support and inspire their creativity, the depletion of natural resources and the threats to environment can impact these artists' work. For example, local communities like Pueblo no longer have a reliable access to their white slip for pottery. In addition, the black ash tree, which is integral to basket makers in the East, this tree is succumbing to disease brought on by the emerald ash borer beetle. Recognizing threats like these, programs such as the California Basket Weavers Association and Dene Be'ina have developed all over the nation to help address these threats to natural resources as well as maintain these artistic practices. Today, we are lucky to have this knowledgeable and dedicated panel of artists and activists to speak to some of these issues. So I'm going to jump into introductions of our panelists. First, we have Mr. Roy Kady. Mr. Kady learned weaving at age 9 from his mother and grandmothers, and today is considered to be a master weaver and fiber artist among his peers in his Dene community. Mr. K's work has been exhibited in many museums, and he has been invited to share his sheep and weaving culture all over the world. He is actively involved with Dene youth, teaching them weaving and other fiber arts, and he also served one term as the president of the Tisnospas chapter of the Navajo Nation and maintains a large flock of registered Navajo Turo sheep. Next, we have Rose Simpson. Ms. Simpson was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was raised among an extended family of artists in Santa Fe and Santa Clara, Pueblo, of both indigenous and Anglo descent, with art and philosophy primary in both families. She has pursued the pure expression of truth through many forms of art making, including sculpture, printmaking, drawing, creative writing, music, and dance. Her work often signifies the constant struggle between the two worlds in which most modern indigenous people live, the world of traditional native culture and that of the colonial perspective. In 2011, she obtained her MFA in ceramics from the Rhode Island School of Design in Providence. Next, we have Cathy Wallace. Ms. Wallace has been making traditional Karuk, Yurok, and Hupa baskets and necklaces for 35 years. As one of the founding mothers of the California Basket Weavers Association, Ms. Wallace has worked to revive basket weaving among California tribes, as well as to protect the practice of the art itself. Today, she is helping to accomplish this through teaching California Native culture and Native American basketry at San Francisco State University. She works with museums and galleries to make sure that the interpretation of California Native culture is guided by Native American consultants and to make access to archival collections available to traditional practitioners. So let's all welcome our great panelists today. So I'd just like to start with some introductions by the panelists themselves. All of you are involved with organizations concerned with sustainability. Starting with Roy, can you provide us with a brief introduction of your organization and what your organization does to support artists and or artistic practices?
I'm of the Many Goats clan, born for the salt. My paternal grandparents are the yaka strung out in a line, and my maternal grandparents are the folded arms. I'm happy to be here. I come from a small knit community called East Nazabas. It's in the Four Corners. East Nazabas is also interpreted back into a circle of cottonwood trees. And just like we gathered here, that's where we used to gather and discuss things or make plans. I belong to an organization called the Nebe'ina, and it is interpreted back into English as Navajo Life Way. And it's at the sheep life ways that we continue to practice pastoralism, sustainability in terms of our livelihoods, and carrying that on for the next generations to come. The organization helps many fiber artisans and sheep herders in obtaining some knowledge to continue to carry. Some people have forgotten how to weave or even to set up a loom. And so we come into the communities and we encourage and share with them again the proper way of dressing a loom, or the proper way of spinning a yarn, or carding it, or washing it using the natural resources that we gather. And so the Nebe'ina has been around since 1990, and it was founded by a group of Navajo ladies who said, let's do something. Let's make sure that this livelihood and this lifeway carries on into the next millennium. So Navajo Lifeway, just in brief, helps many artisans and then also goes into many net communities throughout the reservation and helping people with whatever it is that they would like to relearn or to share. So that's the Nebe'ina.
Singi Tamu, I'm Rose Simpson from Santa Clara, Pueblo, and I'm on the board of directors of the nonprofit organization Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute. And if you're not familiar with the word permaculture, permaculture is it's a study of sustainable living systems and the practice therein. So the organization was started at Santa Clara, Pueblo by my mother, Roxanne Swenzel, and my stepdad at the time, Joel Glansberg, in the late 80s. And basically the idea was to apply sustainable living systems to the place where we lived, and living off the 1/8 of an acre of land that we had there completely. So my point is I grew up in the idea of permaculture and practicing that. And I was homeschooled. We grew all our own food. We didn't have electricity by choice. And meanwhile, my mom was a practicing artist. And through the study of permaculture, there's a way of looking at the world in the most sustainable way. So it's like everything is energy transfer, right? Everything's a transfer of energy. So how do you use the least amount of energy to sustain oneself? Basically looking at it as a your carbon footprint or whatever to sustain yourself, and then how much you give back to it. And what we would call that is pattern understanding and seeing the pattern of the world. And as the organization evolved, as I got older, we realized more and more that permaculture is actually a traditional way of looking at the world through an indigenous perspective. So it's actually a very, very cohesive manner to the indigenous lifeway pre-contact. And so Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute through time has transferred more into cultural preservation than through the man who coined the term, Bill Mollison's idea of permaculture. And so we do a lot more with cultural preservation, seed preservation, and I believe because my mother's an artist and I'm an artist, and we understand that there is no difference between the aesthetic expression, the creative expression, and that pattern understanding. And the more conscious we can be with our creative expression, the less amount of energy we use in the world. And so that pattern understanding is an aesthetic reality. It's a relational aesthetic. And so this is something that has fed my work, that has fed my expression, and became my conversation in graduate school in why we do what we do. Why, as artists, do we create an aesthetic reality? Because it builds our consciousness and the consequences of our actions. And there's sort of an aesthetic responsibility that goes back to what Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute is about. And currently we have classes. We've been running this traditional men's weaving workshop at the house we have there in San Pedro, on the reservation at Santa Clara, where we bring a bunch of the Pueblo men together, and they sit and weave, and we grow the cotton in the backfield, and they spin it. And we have a seed pot workshop where we take the women who would save the seeds, and we grow the seeds out, and we make the pots to save them, and we talk about the manner in which you do something and the aesthetic you put into it. And I guess we'll get more into that. That's kind of an introduction.
Let's see, I'll start. I've been a basket weaver not all my life. I helped gather. And I didn't realize my grandmother was, because she usually did it in the winter when I wasn't around her. I spent my summers on the reservation, but I didn't really see her weaving. And when I moved back to our tribal area, I had the opportunity to learn how to weave. And then I moved away from the area and felt very alone in my practice, because there was nobody else around me to gather with. I didn't know where plants were. I felt disconnected from the landscape, disconnected. I didn't feel at home. And so when the opportunity to participate in a conference of basket weavers from all over our state of California happened, I gladly went to that and met all kinds of basket weavers. But I also learned that there were only 250 basket weavers left in California, representing 200 tribes, because California has more tribes than any other state, over 200. And everybody does things in a different way, but we share a lot of philosophies that are the same. And part of it is gathering, learning sustainability. You gain a relationship with your landscape, your community. You're making baskets for community. By gathering, you are helping the landscape. It's all tied together. It's hard to separate them from the art. And it's just a continuation of the culture. So we started, those that were a little bit younger were encouraged, we were told by our elders that you need to start an organization where we can get supplies and we can get young people interested in learning. And out of that came the California Indian Basket Weavers Association. And I served on that board for 16 years. And we worked really hard. I learned to become an advocate for my people. A lot of basket weavers weren't comfortable in that position of having to advocate for themselves, having to get permission to gather on federally regulated lands or owned lands. It was just really hard for them to do. So our little group of women, it started out with mostly women, they learned how to advocate. We learned how to advocate for our people. We learned where to go. We went all the way to the top. We went to the Forest Service. We went to Washington, D.C. and talked to the chief of the Forest Service. And we found out by starting at the top, it filtered down. And we were able to get them to start burning for us, to start thinking about the way we used plants in the forest, which they had no idea. So they sprayed with pesticides, and that was poisoning our basket weavers. And it made you really stop and think, as a basket weaver, am I poisoning myself? Am I poisoning my children by carrying this on? So that was really important. That was a really important thing to happen. And a lot of the forests do not spray anymore. or else they set aside areas. And the same with Caltrans, which is our state transportation department. They started an advisory committee of Native Americans because they wanted to start putting native plants alongside the road, quit spraying, particularly where people were gathering plants, because elders had a hard time climbing fences, and it was easier to gather by the side of the road. So that came originally out of SEBA. We helped with other people get their Basket Weavers Association started, and it became, I don't know, it just carried us away, and it got to the point where a lot of us didn't have time to weave anymore. But we knew we were doing important work and making it so other people could weave. We were also bringing a lot of young people on board and making them interested, because it was considered an old-fashioned thing to do, and people were a little bit embarrassed and ashamed of doing it. But now it became the thing to do, and everybody wanted to learn, and they wanted a teacher, but there were hardly any teachers. So since 1991, when we started the organization, and there were only 250 basket weavers, we're around 1,000 now. So we've raised that up. We've also gotten more access to lands, because most of us do not own our lands. In California, only half of the tribes are federally recognized, and not all of them own any land at all to gather on. And so even though there are traditional lands that people have been gathering for thousands of years, we're not allowed to gather. If you have to be card-carrying Indian, and it's been really hard for California people. The other thing is that you'd think that, well, if we find a big source of materials, that we could use them in all over California. Well, that's not so, because we have so many different climates and landscapes in California. All the basket weaving has adapted to those landscapes, those plants, and so we all use different material, which is why I brought an assortment. So you get up in Northern California, where I'm from, and you're gathering willow and ferns and bear grass, which grows in high elevations. But you get to Southern California, and you're gathering juncus, and they use some willow too. Willow seems to be used a lot by basket weavers. And Central California, you're using sedge roots and willow and redbud, and it just changes depending on where you're going. So you're constantly having to look for resources. So that was one of the things that got me started in advocating for basket weavers. And then we formed alliances with different groups, like, for instance, the Cache Creek Conservancy, which is a nature preserve, and they asked our help, and we started a native plant garden so we could use it in our teaching. We could take our students out to see what the plants look like growing and what they look like on different parts of the year, and they could actually do some gathering. Not a lot, I mean, you can't gather enough, but just to learn the process and learn to recognize the plants. With museums, we started getting them to open their archives to us, because a lot of our baskets sat in warehouses on shelves. Nobody ever saw them. And we, for many, many different reasons, don't often have a whole selection of baskets in our homes. We've had to either sell them, they've been lost in fires, different things have happened. So to be able to go and look at your relatives' work in a museum, or at least your tribal work in a museum, when you start out as a basket weaver, is really, really important. So a lot of museums now are doing this, and I work with the Oakland Museum right now on their advisory council, Native American Advisory Council, also with NAGPRA. I do work at NAGPRA. I work on the NAGPRA program. I don't know if any of you know what that is, but it's the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and those of you that work in museums probably know about this. But anyway, I work within our university, but also on in the Oakland Museum. And we've formed a really good relationship. And they have a variety. they don't expect one of us to represent the whole state, which is impossible for one person to represent the whole state, but they have a whole group from different areas putting their input into whatever we do, any exhibit or any policies that are made. And I've worked with different museums all over on advisory councils and helping with exhibits and being guest curator. I taught for a while at UC Davis and worked with the Gorman Museum there, which is an Indian art museum. So I can't even remember everything that I've been involved with.
We'll have more time to get back to you, and you can add to that. Well, thank you for your introductions. A little bit of feedback here. Can one of you address how the environment in which you base your art practice has changed over the years, and how has this affected the materials you use?
I'll talk to you're going to have to shut me up. The state of California isn't the same state as it was when the missionaries first started their first mission in California. And all the waterways have changed. Where there were lakes, it's all been, the water's used for agriculture. It's all drawn off in canals, levees. All the native grasses have been browsed over, and the animals that have come in have taken over where the native animals used to eat. They've killed a lot of different varieties of birds, and there are a lot of different animals that are no longer in existence, a lot of plants. They've replaced native grasses, which have very deep roots that are drought resistant, with short-rooted plants from other areas. And so in a drought like we're having now, they just die. And where before they also could lie dormant for maybe 50 or 100 years. So, but as far as it affecting our artwork, because we have so many different varieties, and anybody who's doing traditional art, it just doesn't work when you try something else, when you substitute something else. And so you might teach using a non-native plant, but it just isn't right. And it's more than plants. It's like these are pine nuts, these are dentalian shells, abalone shells. In our ceremonies, we don't have drums, but this is our music. It's our beads that accompany it. You listen to the sound. So you have to have good abalone, and it's dying. It's dying back. All the different kinds of shells. And all the traditional arts that you see here, these are all very traditional, but almost every one of the traditional artists in California also have another medium that they use, and they use to express themselves, whether it's acrylics or carving or jewelry making. So they usually dabble in both. They usually do the traditional arts, and they do more contemporary arts. So it affects both the contemporary and the traditional arts, the loss of resources. And it's really hard. It just makes being an artist hard.
Thank you, Cathy. Roy, maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about the Turo sheep and the environment in which they graze and how that relates to
Everybody
work.
familiar with the Turo sheep here? You know how flavorful and wonderful it is. They're the first domesticated sheep breed in North America. Its origin is from Spain. We acquired it from raiding and trading and from the Spaniards, but we accept that. And so it adapted to the the semi-arid country on the Navajo reservation because it's very adaptable. It's disease resistance. Unlike me, with a bigger tummy, they eat less. So the fat contents apply themselves to the outer side of the inner organs. They don't marbleized throughout the meat. So that's why it has a better tasting flavor. And it's also considered leaner. And so this particular breed sheep, which is sacred to us, among others, is the sheep that we were told would come to us at a later time, at creation, when it was created. And so we had a wonderful reunion after it came from Spain. And then it adapted to the country and the people who raised them. And that's when we rejoiced in the sheep song. Shiliye aneye, shiliye aneye, shiliye aneye, aneye. My sheep are calling me is the name of the song. And so as we reunited, we rejoiced and started raising this particular sheep. And this sheep provides us with a livelihood, which is sustainable to us, because we utilize it to maintain the land wherever we raise them, wherever we graze them. And so we were semi-nomadic with the sheep. And so we utilize every part of the sheep. Even the hooves were eaten because there's a very yummy, flavorful contents that sits inside the hoof. And afterwards, the hooves were used in rattles. And so the pelts, the wool, is special to us because it has a dual fiber. It has a guard hair and also an inner softer wool. And so the two combined makes it a very high quality yarn to utilize in our blankets and any utilitarian woven objects or pieces that we used to weave. And so through wear, this particular wool, though it's considered coarse, so becomes like silk. And some of the pieces that you see in the museum and their archives, if you're the staff not looking, feel it, and it's very silky smooth. And so this particular sheep breed is a wonderful animal that adapts to its land, to its environment. So right now we're going through a drought, and they're able to survive. They adapt to the land in terms of forage. If there is less forage there, they'll eat less and be content. They don't eat as much in terms of other sheep breed. So they're kind of short and scruffy little sheep, but they're wonderful. They still have a sort of a wild instinct. Even though they're short and scruffy, they can hurdle a 6-foot person and jump over you if startled enough. And so, but one of the things that I know we're noticing more and more so is this particular sheep breed, which was near extinction in 1970. There's been a revival of them, a reintroduction to some of the sheep herders, but just as quickly it's being turned and being traded back to the larger animals, which are the cows. And so I know our sheep population on the reservation has really dwindled. There's several factors. Most of the sheep herders, I'm reaching that age, but belong to our elders. And not very many of our younger generations are picking it up. But we are still hopeful because with the Nebe'ina and the work that they do, their missions and their goals to keep it alive has worked. And so because of the drought and because of the less work it may take to raise a cow for us, a lot of it is being sold off and then traded in for cows in turn. But this particular wool is also, in a way, resurfacing in the weaving world, which is a great thing to see. I know my wonderful friend here, DY, has always been a great advocate of this particular fiber. I think her family also owns a herd, and if not, I know she utilizes that in a lot of her work. It is a fiber that is our strength in the fabrics and in the rugs that we weave. And in that same sense is the way we also want to continue as a nation in a world knitted together, utilizing and referencing the strength of the yarn. And so the two dual fibers make that good quality yarn. And so the Navajo Turo Sheep, because of the namesake, because of the Hispanics here in New Mexico, we share this name together. And that's why you see it written as Navajo-Turo. And so they're a unique sheep breed, but it's still a rarity. It's still considered very rare. Back in 1970, there were less than 400 left in the United States. And now we have a little bit over 8,000. So we're somewhat getting them back up into the numbers. But we are still also, I guess, combated with the idea that sheep herding is the past and not in my hometown, or not where I live, or not where I'm at, because sheep herding is a booming thing for me. My work includes everything from utilizing the fiber to selling the meat to restaurants, and even Jamie Oliver coming across from the United Kingdom and saying to me, how awesome is this? So it's here to stay. I'm glad to report that, and to continue the work with the youth in our communities and providing them with a summer sheep camp where they get to experience this again. So I think in that sense we're hopeful, but we still have a lot of work to do. We still have a lot of things that I think we need to educate ourselves with about the environment. And so we utilize the sheep in our prayers still, in our songs that we sing, because we are hopeful that we can help heal our environment and our mother. And so that's Navajo Turo.
Rose, I've heard you speak before about sustainability, and you're very passionate about it, and I'd really like to hear your perspective a little bit more about the permaculture and how that's related to artistic practice and sustainability of artistic practices.
Well, as a contemporary artist, I wake up in the morning, I get in my car, turn the key, use my fossil fuels, go to Santa Fe Clay, and I order a box of clay. This clay comes from a factory somewhere, and the factory gets its components from open pit mines, maybe the Kaolin mine in Florida or Alabama. That stuff is mixed, made into these heavy boxes of 50-pound, 100-pound boxes of clay, and shipped across the country. We use fossil fuels for that. So I take that clay in these plastic bags in a box. I put it in the back of my car. I drive back to Santa Clara with my clay, and I make a piece. I sit there and I make a piece. And I taste the clay, and I talk to the clay, even though it came from open pit mines somewhere in Alabama or Florida. And then, if my piece is 8 feet tall or whatever, I chop it into pieces, and I pop it into what? My kiln. And I turn that kiln on, and I wait till it reaches 2,200 degrees before I turn it off. That's cone 5. Now, how much fossil fuels, how much carbon footprint did I use to do that? Is that nuclear fission? Is that coal power? Is that wind power? And I think about these things for everything I do. I think about it. Because of the way I was raised, I think about it. I think about every time I get in the car, I know that I'm burning fossil fuels. So what am I doing with that? Am I going to the movies to watch something that's not going to fuel my soul? Or am I going to do something that's going to make me think, make me grow, make me move and evolve as a human being, so that I take those fossil fuels that I took from the world, the energy that I took from the world in order to feed my day, the plants and animals that died to keep me going, the paper I use, the plastic I use, all those things. I think about, am I doing it justice with what I do in my day? Am I doing it justice? Do I take that energy that gave itself to me, and do I turn it around and I make something that makes people wake up to a certain level, a new thing, to notice a pattern? Maybe it's not just sustainable. Maybe it's not just environmental. Maybe it's a pattern inside ourselves that makes us question ourselves deeper. Then is that worth it? Is that worth it? Is what I'm doing in the fossil fuels I'm using to make this art piece and then ship it somewhere, or whatever it takes to play this game, is it worth it? Is it waking us up to what's going on in the world? Do we pay a higher level of attention to the patterns of the world? Is it emotional sustainability? Is it spiritual sustainability? Psychological sustainability? Or is it simply saying, this doesn't feel good and this does feel good? Hanging out with the sheep might feel good. And if we can pay attention to what that is, we might make a choice to go hang out with the sheep instead of go get high in a trailer. And that's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. And the reality is my people are dying. It's like, I went to grad school, I came back, and people I went to high school with are overdosing, And there's a reality in what are we doing in order to give back, and how is that sustainable? And I think growing up a part of Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute made me think that way. Every time I look at my shirt I wear, every time I look at my jewelry, I think, where did this come from? How was this made? What kind of factory made this? What kind of people's energy was put into it? And how can I do it justice with how I move through the world? And so I walk into the traditional men's weaving workshop. I'm not supposed to go in there because I'm not a guy. But I sneak in sometimes and I peek over the shoulder of what they're making. And they're sitting there weaving patterns that are butterflies. They're the mountains. They're the clouds. They're a relationship to place. And it's reminding, as they make that, who they are and where they sit in the world, and their responsibility, and how they are held by this place, and therefore responsible for holding this place. Spiritually, physically, and it reminds me of our connection. It's a pattern, and as they wrap that belt around your waist, you become one with the place. And those are the things that make me remember why we're here. Why things died to keep us going, And every time I eat that piece of lettuce, I say, this died for me. How can I do it justice? And then I can start choosing how I take. Not just what I take, but how I take. And why I take. And how then do the things I take, I turn around and give it back to the world in a greater sense. Because I'm a human being. And human beings are an animal. We're animals that are capable of complex thought, abstract thought. And so we're just tools on this planet to take things and understand them and respect them and honor them in ways that, it's a beautiful thing. As much damage as we can cause, we can turn around and turn it into a beauty. So that's the way permaculture has pushed me to look at my contemporary art practice in a sense of responsibility, and honestly, if you take it back to economics, it's like money is energy as well, and how do we move that through the world, and are we dependent on that? And I think we choose certain things in our lives because we're not growing our own food, and I want to be able to say, I don't need to live that life if I don't choose to. I can grow all my own food and live off the land. And it doesn't have power over me anymore. But it's choosing to play that game, and it's a choosing to live this life, and I am not a victim in it. I am actually a willing participant in this world. So that to me is like taking back our power and being responsible with and conscious of what we take and our responsibility to get back. And that's like, I think, sustainability in a lot of different ways, aesthetics, sustainability even. So.
Well, going back to how you started, well, you come from a family of artists, with this long history of working in clay in particular.
Yeah.
And you started out your narrative about how you use, you go and you buy your clay, and generations before you dug the clay and processed the clay. So I'm kind of curious as to, in talking to your relatives, what are some of their experiences in working with, clay that comes from their environment, and are they experiencing any kind of threats to those resources?
I mean, there is, clay sources that are becoming diminished, and then people who are hoarding it, they don't want to share. And there's secrets where people know where that clay is and they're not going to tell. It is a limited resource, but we also live in New Mexico where there's a lot of clay all over the place. And I think the thing that's getting lost is the ability to be creative with it. And when I was a kid, we used to walk through the hills and wherever we were at in New Mexico, and my mom would stop and she'd pick up a little chunk of clay and crush it in her hand and spit, and then roll it up. She'd make a little pinch pot and be like, "Ooh, that's good stuff," And then we'd walk another 20 feet down or up, and the ground would change color, and sure enough, there she is, spitting in her hand, figuring it out. And that's how a long time ago we figured out how to use this stuff. And we get back to our campfire, throw it in there, next thing you know, one of them blows up. Oh, that was not good. The other two are super good, and they hold water and ready to be that utilitarian vessel that it was, that we had learned through all this processes to create an aesthetic relationship to land, and to create an intimate relationship with that earth in another way. Be it the home, be it the land that we plant our food in, be it the vessel that we drink our water and our nourishment out of. And then how do we decorate those things and make them an aesthetic reality and a relationship where we're constantly reminded of those patterns in our world. So with that said, I grew up knowing how to do that kind of traditional pottery making. And I found limits with it to the conversation that I wanted to be having with my artwork. I wanted to make a piece 8 feet tall out of clay. Why clay? There's a conversation from grad school. Well, why do you make it out of steel? Why don't you make it out of wood? Why don't you make it out of plaster, Well, why clay? Because clay is from the earth, and it comes up and it struggles with gravity the same way our body does, and we have to understand our body in space to understand clay in space to make it that big. It holds our fingerprint. It holds the space and the place that we come from and the relationship, and it actually holds water. And water holds energy, it holds life, and it understands conversation, it's matter. And for some reason I believe that some pieces of matter are more influenced by our intentions than others, and maybe clay holds our prayers and our love and our energy more than others. But maybe that's why clay. But anyways, some of this traditional clay is very brittle. It's short. You roll it into a little snake and you bend it and it cracks. The store-bought clay, you roll it into a snake and you bend it and it bends to your will. So I built a new relationship with that clay because I wanted that clay to stand 8 feet tall, because I wanted it to be that strong, and I wanted it to go to the temperatures I wanted it to go to, so that I could make that clay be confrontational. That's why, So it's a choice I make, it's a choice I make. I just got back from New Zealand hanging out with this guy named Richard Zane Smith, who's a really cool potter. Some of you may know his work. And he builds his own kilns, and we're out there building this turf kiln and firing our stuff out there with wood. I got super excited. And it's like, there's something about firing your clay with wood, where you look at the amount of wood it takes to take your clay to the temperature it needs to go to, and you're more conscious about how much you're taking from the world in order to make this thing vitrified so that it doesn't crumble when it gets wet. So, I guess one concern that I sort of have with the traditional way of, the quote-unquote current traditional way of pottery making is that a lot of the clay work that's done now isn't high-fired enough. We use less, we as in Pueblo people use less wood and fire it lower so that it keeps the shine. The shinier it is, the more eye-catching it is. The shinier it is, the more prone to breaking it is. It's not a functional object the way that it used to be, It's not necessarily traditional anymore. It's traditional by way of the consumer sense, but it's not traditional by way of the utilitarian functional sense that we used to have with our pots. We make a pot and we take it to the gallery, therefore it's functional, it's utilitarian, but we take it home and we pour our red chili stew in there and it's going to melt. So you start asking, why are we doing what we're doing? What is our intention? It's energy movement. It's the economics of it. It's all different kinds of things. So I guess the conversation I want to have is, let's think clearer and a little further about why we're doing what we're doing, and then say, what is my artist statement? What is my thesis statement? What is my intention, and how can I best get there? Let's start at the intention and then go back and say, what am I doing and why, rather than just following. But that's because I'm a young person who comes from a family of people who are always challenging the status quo, I guess. It's a tradition.
Well, Rose raises some interesting points, and this sort of leads into my next question. So, Roy or Cathy, well, say your materials that you create your work with now no longer were available. Why not create in plastic, or go to Joann Fabrics and buy some acrylic yarn and make what you make? Can you comment on that?
Want to go first?
Okay. I could do that. I could, but I wouldn't feel right, because along with the materials comes this responsibility to take care of those materials, and you building a relationship with those plants, building a relationship with the place from which they came, which ties you to the earth and grounds you. It's a whole, and it ties you to your ancestors who's gathered in that place for thousands of years. And so yeah, I could do that, and I have on occasion for teaching when I had 25, 50 students, because I'm not going to gather for that many, because they should be gathering for themselves. And I want them to form a relationship. And when I take them out on a field trip, that's one of the first things they say. I've never looked at the world this way before. They've never stopped long enough to look at what things grow on the side of the road. On the way back, they're like, oh, there's some willow. There's some grass that we use. And it's, like you say, it's forming a relationship. And we, too, believe that whatever you make, baskets in particular, you put a little of your own spirit into every single one that you make. But you have responsibility, because the spirit, some of the spirit of those plants and animals that go into making it are put into it too. So not only do you want to do a good job, the best job you can do, because you owe that to them, but also you want to make sure they go to somebody who's going to treat them right. And it makes it really hard for people like me. I could never make a living, I think, actually just basket weaving, because it would be really hard for me. People have to talk me out of my baskets and promise me a lot of things. Because I've formed this relationship with this piece, which most artists do, any kind of artwork you do, you form a relationship, you watch it grow. It's like having a child and a baby and raising it up. And you have this close relationship. And, but it's also a responsibility. Responsibility. Those are your relatives too, those plants, that they inhabit that same space. We're interdependent on each other for food, for fertilizer, for us trimming the plants to make them so that they're usable for basketry. You can't just go and gather anything anywhere and come out with a really fine basket. You can make baskets out of it, but it's not going to be really fine. And I was taught you're supposed to do the best you can do, no matter what job you have. You do the best that you can do. And I always feel like I have that ancestor overlooking my shoulder. And even when I do beads and things, and that I want to please them too. I want to please my grandmother, and I want to please generations back. I want to be doing it the right way and the right thing. And I do make contemporary things too. These are traditional beads, but I also make non-traditional beads that I. It's okay if I sell those, and like you, I've gone and gotten some of the beads. Of course, you're going to pay for, but pieces of abalone that are pre-cut and put together, and I put as much into it, but I know that people wouldn't buy what I thought this was worth, and the hours I put into it, and restringing it because it didn't come out right the first time. And in baskets too, I mean, I'm a slow weaver, and I might have 5, 6 baskets going at the same time. I don't know when I'm going to get it finished. I can't even measure how much time. I know that a baby rattle, this one's not mine, this is from Yokut's lady, but this one is the start of a baby rattle for me, and it takes me 3 days. It takes me 3 days, just the weaving. That's not counting all the materials. And I have to know where to get good materials. And I have to take care of those materials in order for them to be good and even and strong and straight. So I forgot the question. Thank you.
Well, it reminds me of my upbringing, because when I was about 10 years old, I remember my mother saying to me, I think you're ready to start your own loom. From watching me this long and sitting next to me and just absorbing the process, I think you're ready to do your own. And so here are some yarns to use for that particular piece, but you select the colors yourself. And I remember she brought out a basket full of yarns, and I looked through them and I thought to myself, those are really bright colors that I normally don't see her using herself. And so I was a little, leery, and I kept thinking to myself, why is she bringing this basket of yarn to me? And I remember picking them up and saying, it don't feel right to me. It doesn't talk to me. It doesn't sing to me. And I thought to myself, why is she letting me use this particular kind of yarn? And I didn't know it was acrylic then. So needless to say, I started weaving the piece. And as I went along the way, I still kept thinking to myself that things just didn't feel right. It felt kind of lifeless to me. It felt, because as a weaver, a lot of, just as a potter, and just like anything else that we do, our fingers, the senses, the feeling, it's there. When you touch something, you can feel the life of it. You can communicate with it in those terms. And in some ways you can say to it, now spin for me this way. Might be uniform for me this way. And even in the songs, that's the song that it creates. And so when I was weaving that piece, I'm about midway, and she even said, oh, you should just do stripes. stripes is going to be really good and fast for you. You'll finish it quickly, and you know, you may take it to the trading post with me because I'm also weaving one that I'm almost done with. And so I said, no, I don't want to do stripes. I want to do something that you're doing. And so I started setting my loom next to her, and I started weaving that piece. But again, about a little over halfway, I just stopped it, and I just said, this can't go on. And then I just made it my excuse to go play with friends in the hills and whatever else, and I just never finished that piece. My mom had saved it for me, and she had just recently passed in September, and I found it, and that's what I remembered that experience. And so I've used some acrylic pieces, like in my hummingbird, for the iridescent. That was before I learned that I could spin some feathers, like from the peacock, to get that iridescent that I want. But I have utilized it, but not in pieces where it's more than 1%. I encourage a lot of the weavers that I work with to continue to utilize the natural fibers, because they're just so much more alive, and you can feel that. And when you work with it, you know, it finishes that way, and the pieces, when you look at them, are much alive. And that's how my elders also refer to it. They always refer to the natural hand-spun, grown wool as it being alive. And so in that way, in that sense, I guess I learned earlier on that I wasn't prone to utilizing the acrylic or some of the synthetic materials, because it just doesn't feel good like wool does. And so that's what I have to share.